Sound matters. Be heard. Welcome to the podcast where you get exclusive behind-the-scenes tips to make your own show sound truly spectacular. This is Podtastic Audio.
Hey, what's happening? How are you doing today? Thank you so much for being here today. My name is Chris, and I am from the original Chris and Christine Show podcast. You can find out every single thing you want to know about that show on and over on the website, which I've created at chrisandchristineshow.com. There's always a link to that into the show notes of every single episode. I made it very simple and very easy for you. So how are you doing? And how's your podcast coming along? Do you even have a podcast? Well, maybe you do. Well, maybe you don't. Don't you worry if you do not have a podcast. I am here to help you create your podcast, make it sound amazing, help promote it, and get it out there to the world. So today is going to be a very special day because today we're going to talk about how to properly market your podcast, get it out there to the masses, share it to the world, and I'm going to give you tips and tricks on how to do that. And these tips and tricks are really going to cost you nothing. That's right, nothing. Did that just blow your mind? Tips and tricks on how to market your podcast for free. Check that out. So before we get into all that fun stuff, I want to say one thing first off the bat. If you can tell already, this show might sound a little different. And that is because I am in Studio B. But not only am I in a different studio, I'm also using different equipment. See, today, this show is brought to you by the Zoom PodTrak P4 machine. I'm using my PodTrak right now, and you are hearing me talk into a Samson Q2U microphone. Now, the Samson Q2U microphone, I would recommend picking this microphone up for any podcaster that is just starting their podcast. You got to get this microphone. And in fact, I just saw it on sale on Amazon the other day for only $50 US. $50 for this microphone I'm talking into right now. And it goes even one step further than that, is that I am not even using a mic stand. I'm holding this microphone in my hand as I do this podcast. It does not get any simpler than that. I got the Samson Q2U microphone that I'm talking into right now, and it's going directly into the Zoom PodTrak P4, and then it's just sending it right into my computer via Audacity. And that's how this entire podcast is being done right now. Does it sound okay to you? Does it sound pretty good? Because this gear is very cheap for the most part. Like the Zoom PodTrak P4 just went on sale again. I just saw it for $150. I will put links to Amazon to both of these products in the show notes today. And don't you worry thinking that I'm trying to make some money on this stuff, because I'm not. The only reason I'm doing this is to help you. I'm using these tools right now. This show's been recorded on these devices. So for about $200 all in, you can have both of these toys, the microphone and the Zoom PodTrak P4. Now, the reason why I like the Samson Q2U microphone, the one I'm using right now, that is because you can hook it up to a interface like the Zoom PodTrak or even a Rodecaster or any kind of XLR input interface. You can use a microphone with that. Or if you don't have that stuff, let's just say you got your laptop and that's all you have. Well, this microphone can plug directly into any USB microphone, any USB port on your computer, and you're ready to go. Okay, so now let's get to podcast marketing. What is podcast marketing? How do you market a podcast? Why should you? Should you even market a podcast? You want everybody to listen to your show, but do you want everyone to listen to your show? Do you really want everyone to listen to your show? So before you do anything at all when it comes to marketing a podcast, we're just going to assume that you have a fantastic sounding podcast. It sounds amazing. It looks amazing. And you've had somebody else other than a family member listen to it and review it and give you honest feedback and an honest review of your podcast. Now, let's just assume you've done all those things. And let's just assume that you've got your podcast figured out. It is a top-notch show. It is amazing. People love it. It sounds great. People are willing to share it and listen to it again and again and subscribe. Now, let's just assume you've already done all of those things. Great. Now, let's market and let's share it with the world because you want to get it out there. You want to market the show so more people can listen to it, right? Right. So here's what you got to do. So the very first thing you have to figure out when it comes to marketing your podcast is, who is this podcast for? You see, if you're going to throw your podcast out to everybody, hey, come out, check out my podcast. It's here. It's amazing. Check it out. But if you're preaching to people that probably would never listen to your show or not really interested in your show, they're not going to care. They don't care. What would they care for that, Find out exactly who your target audience is and go talk to them. Be in front of them. Put your show in front of them. Though you're probably thinking, well, how do I know who my audience is? Like, how do I know who these people are? Well, it kind of depends what kind of show you're doing, really. Let's say, for example, you're doing like a comic book show, right? It's about comic books and comic book heroes and Spider-Man, Marvel, all that great stuff. Well, maybe your audience would probably be interested in comic books and comic book movies. So there's Comic-Con is the convention. I know it's a big one, but there are other comic book conventions out there. If you just go there and maybe have like a business card or something with your podcast on it and put like a QR code that will send the person who scans the QR code, it sends them directly to, Apple or Spotify or even a website, even better, a website that you created for your podcast, and you share it with them because they're already interested in your content. You see, when you try to make content that is for everybody, it doesn't quite work that way. But you say, oh, the celebrities do it. Oh, Joe Rogan, whatever. Even still, those celebrities have a particular type of person that they're serving. And it's called like their ideal listener. Now, I know that you think like the radio shows and you think like television shows, and they've got millions and millions of listeners and viewers that watch that stuff all the time. But, they're big and they've got tons of money to spend on marketing. I'm not talking about that. I'm saying things you can do for free starting today. You can do these things. So once you figured out who your audience is and you decided to go there and target that group, it's marketing basics 101. It's not that hard to figure that out. So get that figured out first. Once you got that dialed in, here's what you do. When it comes to creating your podcast, now look at your entire podcast as like a company or a business. Starting from the very first thing people are going to see is probably going to be your podcast artwork. It's the first thing they see when they scroll through any app looking for new shows, or a new show comes in their feed or whatever, is your podcast artwork. Now, assuming that your podcast artwork is following along with the dimensions and specs set up by Apple itself, which are maximum 3,000 by 3,000 pixels, has to be a square, and it can't have anything vulgar or any crazy pictures, kind of obvious stuff like that. Any of that stuff cannot be in the image, but basically your image wants to be clear and precise. You want to be able to look at your podcast artwork and determine exactly the name of the show should be in big font, big letters, somewhere in the middle, the name of the show right on it. And from the artwork, you should be able to give a basic idea of what the show is about and whether or not the show is for you or not. So once you get that figured out, maybe you have to recreate your artwork for your show. You might have to change it around, and that is okay. It's very easy to do. You can do it yourself. You can hire somebody to do it. But today we're talking about things you can do without having to pay money. So you can tinker around with Canva. I've done that for this artwork here, created on Canva myself. And then you can easily rechange that in your media host. Whatever host you use, you can easily change the artwork. It's like one click, upload the new file, and be done, and that's it. But if you are going to do that, here's one little tip, though. Make sure that the image title for the file is something different than the image title you had for, say, the original artwork. So, for example, if your original artwork was show art, cool, or something, let's say show artwork. Show artwork was the name of the file name. And the new file is also going to be, show artwork. Well, that won't really fly too well because the file name is exactly the same. So when you update things like an Apple, Spotify, places like that, it may keep the original artwork and not update it with the new stuff. So if you do put the new artwork in there, just use a different file name. You can put on there show artwork 2. Very simple, easy to do. So once you get the show artwork figured out, think of the actual name of the show, whatever the show is. I know there's lots of different shows out there and there are lots of different titles and things like that. And people get really clever with their titles and they get very sneaky and they try to play with words and they try to make it very cool. Like, oh, our show is, let's just say our show is about disc golf. We're going to call it the disc show. What does that even mean? The disc show? Because that could be about a million different things. If someone said my show is the disc show, like, I don't know what I would think it would be about. It could be about anything. It could be about disc brakes. It could be about, frisbees. It could be about flying saucers. It could be about, the discus in the track and field. You throw the big disc thing you throw. It could be about a bunch of different things. So you want to be very clear and very precise about your title too. So when people do hear it, they know exactly what it is and what the show is going to be about for the most part. So once you get your artwork figured out and you get the name of your show figured out, don't try to be cute. You want to be very dumb it down for your listeners so they know. People see it and they say, yeah, I know exactly what this is. I know exactly what this thing is about. I know whether or not this show is for me or not. So if you say it's a disc show, then, it could be anything. You really have to think about whether or not if somebody looks at the title, that's the thing too. You got to ask somebody, hey, if I tell you the title of my show is the disc show, would you know what the show's about? And if they say, I don't have a clue, then it's probably not the right title for you, for your podcast. Okay, so let's assume you got your artwork, you got your podcast title all figured out. So when you do create your actual episodes themselves, well, you got to title those things too. What's the episode title? It's like the subject line for an email. What's this about before we click on and play? Now, some people have been guilty of actually putting in episode 5. And that's all they do. Just episode 5 is the episode. Well, how's that going to tell anybody what it's about? It doesn't say anything. So what you really have to do is if you want to put numbers in there, that is fine. I started doing that a long time ago and I've kind of modified them a little bit. But even still, I would say episode 5, and then I would put a little semicolon, what the episode is about next to it. So you can do that. What I've kind of modified is a little bit. So what I've been doing now is just putting like EP, the number. So it's episode, the number, or you can go modification even further and you can start it off with say 001, 002, 003. The reason why you do it with 3 digits like that, 00 and then the thing, is because when you eventually do get into the hundreds like we are right now, you're not losing those character spaces in that title. I forget the exact number of character spaces you have for the title, but it's not unlimited. Just like an email, when you type in an email and have the email subject line, you're limited on space on that thing. So it's probably about the same amount of characters. So you don't get too wordy with your show episode titles. Your episode title for your podcast should really kind of give a clue to an answer to a question. So each episode, in theory, it doesn't always have to happen this way, but in theory, every single episode should answer a question, and that question should somehow be in the title of the episode. So, for example, this one, tips on how to market your podcast, should have that in the title. And this is so that when you do figure out and you click play on the episode, you do get those answers revealed to you when you push play. You kind of want to start off with a question and then kind of tease the answer, but then eventually give you the answer for every single episode. This will help people want to press play on your podcast. All about marketing, all about getting people to press play. These are simple things that you can do with your podcast today. It won't cost you a single thing. you always have to be thinking, what does the audience have in mind for listening to this podcast? Why are they listening to this podcast? Why would they listen to this podcast? If you were coming across your own podcast, just randomly stumbling across it, and you saw the artwork, and you saw the name, and you saw the title of the episode, would all three of those lined up, would that help you to make the decision to press play on that episode or even subscribe to that podcast? Now, remember, most podcast players, I think almost all of them, always start at the very top of the list of episodes, always delivers and shows you the most recent episode on top. So if you have a show that's continuing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and so on, your most recent one is going to be the one that most people who discover your show today through your amazing podcast marketing, they're going to click on the most recent episode, which will be your most recent one. So make that one your best and try to title it accordingly. And then eventually they may go back and listen to other episodes. And if they like those episodes, like, yeah, you know what? I'm going to subscribe to this guy or girl and I'm going to check out their show. So that's kind of how it works in theory. Now, this doesn't always work for everybody. And if you have a method that you like to do, or you market your show your way, or you do things the way you like to do them, just keep on doing things the way you want. But these things are so easy to do, and they could change your podcast. No promises here, but it could make a difference for your show. You might see more listeners, more engagement, more and more. I know when you're starting out, it's hard to get listeners and it's hard to get engagement and it's just hard stuff. And besides, your first episode's never the greatest anyways. Your first couple episodes, you're just still figuring things out and you're still working out the kinks. And no matter what you start your show with, like if you say from day one, I'm going to do this style of a show, and then by episode 50, you realize, oh, you like doing a different style of a show, don't even worry about it. It's no big deal. Just do what you do and do what's best for you and what you can physically do every single episode too, because don't bite off more than you can chew. You say, I'm going to do this and that and all those crazy things, but can you really? Do you have enough time in the day to do all these things? I'm just giving you simple things that you can do right now. And if you're having trouble figuring out a title for your podcast episode, head on up to ChatGPT. Fire the old ChatGPT AI machine right on up and ask it for ideas for episode titles. And you just type in the content of the episode. What's the episode about? And it will generate titles. Trust me, I do it all the time. It's very quick, very easy. Sometimes it doesn't always generate the best ones, so you always can tweak and modify things. Trust me, it's your show. You can do it however you want. Okay, and the next thing you want to do to help market your podcast is to create very clever, very interesting, very on point, very amazing, I should say, show notes for your podcast episode. Now, what is show notes? Do you even need show notes or show description, as some people like to call it? It's basically right below the actual player in every little podcast. There's like a little section of words right below that. It's called the show description or episode description, or you can call it show notes or whatever, basically. I like to call it show notes, but it can be called whatever you want. Now, you're limited on space on that. I think it's 4,000 characters of space to be in there, but you can put in lots of different things. You can put in links to anything you mention in the podcast episode. If there's a guest you have on, put a link to their information. If you plug a product, put the information to that in the podcast show notes. If you have a website, which we're getting to that later, but you have a website, you put that link to that into the show notes of your podcast episode and a short description of what the episode is about. But also use keywords that will help generate SEO. What is SEO? SEO is search engine optimization, basically meaning that Google likes to scour the internet for words and words that are being targeted and searched up. Like every time you go to a search menu on your computer and you say, I'm going to Google that, and Google it up you will. So you type in whatever you're looking for, and Google has that drop-down menu and has all these different suggestions of people have been looking for things in, like, say, I'm looking how to cook, and then you type that in, and all these different like things pop up right below it of examples of other people, searching that thing. Well, that's kind of how SEO works. And you want to be able to put in words and keywords into your show notes of things people are searching for. So, whatever your show is about, and if you put those keywords into your show notes, there is a high probability that they will actually come up in the search results, which helps Google find your show, and people find your show through Google. And that's kind of how it works. SEO. Now, I know a lot of people are using this method to try to get their podcast bumped up or whatever they're selling or whatever they're doing. SEO is kind of how it works. You want to be able to get your show to be up there in the search results when they're typing in podcasts about blank, whatever your show is about. So try to really use podcast show notes to your advantage. Now, this is not a guarantee that your show is going to be number one in Apple tomorrow by doing that. There's no guarantee any of that stuff's going to happen. If somebody actually promises you, I will guarantee you your show will be number one, or you'll be topped on Google, number one show in the world. If they promise you that for a fee, they're lying. They're just going to take your money, and they may get you up a little high in the charts, but they're not going to put you number one. You're not going to have 1 million downloads overnight. And even if you do, they're probably all bots anyways. They're all fake. Now, I don't know about you, but I don't want any fake people listening to my podcast. I want real listeners with real people with real ears. They can actually listen and put in practice what I'm telling you about what you can do to improve your podcast. So let's say you got all those things figured out and you got all that dialed in correctly. What's next? Well, I mentioned it earlier. That is a podcast website. Now, however you do your podcast website, there are free tools you can use today, right now, to create a podcast website immediately. That is podpage.com. You can get started for free. It takes your RSS feed. You just drop it on in there, or you look it up on Apple. I forget exactly how you do it, but you get your podcast, it gets the RSS feed. It actually imports all your episodes right into a nice little player. You can kind of tweak with it. You can change some of the logos to it. You can change some of the art behind it. Now, for free, it does not allow you to link up your own website domain name to it. But for free, we're talking for free here, it'll be podpage.com/whatever your podcast title is. That will give you a free website, which you can have all your players and also all your links to where you can subscribe to. I'm talking Apple, Google, Spotify, whatever, all the different ones. You can have them all right there, right on your website, ready to go and make it look fantastic within reason, of course, because this is all done on Podpage. But the nice thing about Podpage, I love about it, even for the free version, which I'm using right now myself for this show, and I'm using the free version for the Chris and Christine show, is that it makes it very easy to share this. Each episode that comes out makes it very easy to share it via email, social media, whatever. Makes it very, very easy. Now, the reason why this is so important is because if, let's just say, you have a guest on your podcast. I've had guests. We've all had guests on our podcast. You want in a very easy way to share that episode to your guest, and hopefully, in theory, that guest will share it with their listeners and their subscribers. But it's not a guarantee. There's no written rule that says if you're a guest on a podcast, you have to absolutely share the episode with your listeners. And in fact, I'll go into more of that later, but there's no guarantee that'll happen. But if you have Podpage and you open up that episode and you have the little sharing button, there's about 100 different ways to share the podcast. And one of them is Gmail. You click on the Gmail, it opens up your email if you already got a Gmail account going as a send, and then you type in who this thing's going to go to. Hopefully it's the guest, and you type their name in, and it automatically sends it out to the guest's email so they have a copy of it and a link to that. So when the guest opens their email, they'll have a link to the pod page, which has the player built on it, and it has features to share it right on it. Click, click, done. Makes it very easy. I love it for that feature. I'm not paying for Podpage, but I said for free, why not? Give it a shot. It's a very easy way to share and market your show. Okay, and the next thing I'm going to talk about when it comes to podcast marketing. Now, this one is pretty obvious, and I'm talking about social media. Yeah, I know. You probably already have your Facebook. You already got your Instagram. You already got your Twitter. You already got your so on and so forth. What is it? TikTok. What's the other ones they got out now? Is the Snapchat? Is that still a thing? Snapchat? I don't even know. But maybe you got your MySpace page set up. Your GeoCities had a website builder back in the day before my time. Let me tell you. But yeah, you're on social media. You want to create a social media account for your podcast itself. And what you do with that account is you want to drive engagement with your social media. But you also, at the same time, you don't want to be all just spamming your show all day long. Like, check out my new episode. Check it out. I got an episode. Here's the episode. You want to actually have this opportunity to show off more of your personality with your social media. Well, how do you do that? Well, if you can sprinkle in other things other than the episode and the content of the episode or the guest information, if you can sprinkle more things in your social media other than that stuff, then people will know to like you and trust you. You see, podcasting, more than just content itself, just for content's sake, people will listen to your podcast for you and for your personality and the things that you're interested in and the things that you like to do and things that are about you. That's one of the cool things I used to always like when I would, because social media was brand new, and I think I used to be a fan of morning radio and morning radio show type stuff. And social media kind of first hit the scene, and all the radio DJs had their own social media accounts linked in through the station or whatever. And you could see kind of behind the scenes what they're into and what they like, and maybe even, where they go on vacation, or maybe, check them driving their car, or they like shopping here, or they do this, or they go there. It's almost like you're stalking them a little bit without stalking them a little bit, because they're giving these information, they're putting this stuff out on their social media. I know they all do it, and I think you should do it too. A little personality about you and a little bit about your stuff and what you're doing, what you got going on in your world will help with podcast marketing, because it puts more of a face and an image and more of a personality to the show rather than just the straight up content. There's a good chance that your content, I know, but you sit down for this one. There's a good chance your content is actually being used by somebody else right now. What? Yeah, I know. You're not the only one covering that one topic. I know, huh? Check that out. There's probably a lot of shows about podcasting. I know. I subscribe to all of them. There's probably a lot of podcasts about your content. Oh, but you got a guest on your show. Oh, you know what? The bigger the guest, the more shows that they've been on. There's a good chance that the guest you've had on Friday, when you recorded this person on Friday, whenever you recorded them, there's a good chance they did a podcast episode Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, before they even got to your show on Friday. So if you're going to have a guest on, try to do a better or different interview than everybody else did. Stop asking the same questions that everybody else did. Ask them different questions. Get to know them. Show a little of your personality. Be more engaging and have more of a conversation rather than a just simple Q&A. Let's get the facts and get out, And the final thing I have to say about podcast marketing, one tip in general you probably should do if you're not doing it already, is just ask. Just ask people, will you please check out my show? And are you even interested in this type of content? Will you please check out my show? Here it is. But don't be spammy. Just got to be cool about it. Now, you can do this on social media with DMs directly, or even do if you're on Twitter, you can even, if you don't have access to the DM on that particular person, you always can, do a tweet directly towards them, and hopefully they'll get it and read it. And then maybe they'll check out your show. But there's no guarantee that they will even like what you have to say. And there's no guarantee that they will even like your podcast. And that is okay. Not everybody is going to like your podcast. And you kind of have to realize that when you create a show. That's why, as you go back to the very beginning of this episode, we're talking about who is your podcast audience. Figure out who they are and go to them. You would not be pitching your true crime show to the Susie Homemaker podcast people, It just wouldn't really work out that way. So these are all fantastic, very easy to do tips that you can do to help promote your podcast today that are not going to cost you a single thing. Now, I know there's companies and I know there's ways where you can spend lots and lots of money if you want to promote your podcast or market your podcast, and you can get involved with those people. You can spend your money however you want to do it. But I would not do that, but it's up to you. You can do your show however you want to do your show. It's your podcast. Don't let me or anybody else tell you how to do your podcast. Hey, thank you once again for listening. You know what? If you have any problems creating your podcast, maybe need some one-on-one help to figure out the problems maybe you're dealing with, you always email me at podtasticaudio@gmail.com, and I will respond with my best answers to try to figure out the problems that you might be having with your show. And I'll catch you on the next episode. Thank you for listening.